Welcome to Movies That Matter, the podcast about recent films going above and beyond the call of box office returns to boldly explore a social issue affecting people's lives. I'm Nicole Finari.
And I'm Garret Schoenhammer.
And today we're going to overanalyze
Judy.
All right. So Judy is actually based on a play called End of the Rainbow by Peter Quilter, starring Renee Zellweger as Judy Garland, set late in her life, in her last years performing at a London nightclub. What did you think?
What a movie.
Yeah.
I will get into it, but I found it lovable. I hated it. And I found it just unequivocally ironic as well.
Okay.
And I think that all that combined made for a decent viewing experience, but I don't know if I loved the movie overall.
Okay. I hated it.
Yeah, well.
This was my specific bias. We've talked about this before. I don't like addicts. I don't like movies about addicts. I think they're kind of one note, usually. They follow the same sort of trajectory of the person trying to put their life back together, the addiction getting the better of them being really annoying to everybody around them, and I'm I just don't care.
And there's something to be said about addiction, but I think what they missed about part of this movie is Judy Garland was a diva. She was the era of divas really starting out in her adult life. And I think sometimes the movie convoluted that addiction was the reason Judy was rude and was annoying.
Yeah.
And I'm sometimes I think that was just what was expected of a diva, to be late to a show, to kind of throw a little shade at the audience, to kind of power play past people. But in this movie, they kind of just made her look strung out.
Yep.
And that's not actually how I've ever read her addiction stories portrayed.
Right.
That she actually tried to keep her addiction very quiet and tried to manage her life. But what they capitalized least on is that Judy did not start this addiction herself. And that's what was missed, because in the movie,
I felt that was so heavy-handed in the movie. That's interesting.
I didn't...
With all those flashback scenes.
But they made it seem like she just continued it on and ever. She was required until I think the age of almost 27, required to take medication by her producers.
Right.
And that's lost in the movie. And so it's not, it is addiction, but it's also dependence, because for 15 years of her life, she was required to take medication. And it was almost forced dosing.
I think it was beyond even, 15 years.
Yeah. The last known recorded requirement was when I think she was 27 was the last time.
I was reading something that it actually started before the studio. Her mom used to give them, when they were performing as the Gum Sisters, her mom used to give them uppers to get them on stage for their vaudeville act. So, it's quite possible it was basically her entire life she was on some kind of upper.
Right. And when your body is lived for...
Yeah, it's very hard to...
30 plus years on that, you cannot withdraw, unfortunately. We know from... You just can't withdraw.
Yeah, you've literally reset your brain pathways that way.
I don't know. Like I said, I came in here thinking you would not like it after watching the movie.
Yeah.
Which is okay. Because I think we don't like it for the same reason. So go on. I'd like to hear them.
Okay. So, I think this is a tough one. I'm curious. The buzz and all the discussion about this movie is really been less about the movie as a whole, which people have mostly agreed was a bit uneven, and more about Renee Zellweger's performance. What did you think? So, what did you think of Renee Zellweger's performance?
What a way to come back.
Yeah.
If you're going to take a role and knock it out of the park, there were times I was watching that, and she doesn't look like her in the face. Let's just be clear to me. I did not feel like she looks like Judy Garland in the face. Judy Garland just looks a certain way that I don't think we'll ever be able to recapture without CGI. And They didn't do that for this movie, which I appreciated. But her movements, the way she dilated her eyes, her mouth tics, I was enthralled. And I thought Renee Zellweger was giving that her best. However, I was so disappointed in her lip syncing abilities. Didn't quite capture, the mouth movements were great and everything, but she didn't quite match the words for me. And especially if you're going to do a movie on queer culture, a gay icon, which we'll get into a little bit later.
Yep.
And you're going to have somebody lip sync.
Yep. Although it was her singing. It wasn't Judy Garland. I checked.
It wasn't.
No, it's Renee Zellweger actually performed the numbers as well. She was still definitely lip singing when they filmed the movie. Like,
well, that's even worse then because she did sing those songs, so she should know.
Yeah.
And so it should have been. Well, then I got to give her props for sounding very close to Judy Garland.
I was thrown off, and I wondered about that because I'm like, Renee Zellweger does not have the vocal range that Judy Garland.
Which is why
But does Judy Garland have the vocal range of Judy Garland as at that stage in her life? Like, probably not. And you keep seeing her smoking, and it made me like crazy.
Well, that was one thing that didn't make sense to me. It makes more sense now that you've said it. Judy Garland still had a pretty great range throughout most of her life, and so this whole there was this whole thing about she couldn't sing her high notes.
Yeah,
and it was a subtle undertone of the whole movie. She couldn't really sing the parts that she used to and everything. So she did all low songs. Now I'm thinking that's Renee Zellweger's only way to get in there and sing those songs or those lower tonal songs.
I think both are true. I think it probably was a play to Renee Zellweger. And I guess that sort of annoys me. I'm like, just have her lip sync to the Judy Garland recordings.
I
just sort of why even have her sing? But I actually liked her performing as Judy the best. That's when I was most able to see her as Judy Garland.
I'm telling you, the hand movements, the way she did her arms, the mouth tics, her mouth makeup was phenomenally well done. The wrinkles that were creasing there and how Judy had that really nice tight lip. And like I said, I thought there were times especially when she would turn around and dance.
Yeah.
Or when she would move that one, this is a weird thing if you've watched a lot of Judy Garland, the way she would move her foot out like that. I was just...
And she would she had that hunch, Judy Garland kind of hunches forward. I think she did an amazing job with that. I think the one big issue for me with Renee Zellweger, which is not her fault, is that she has such a recognizable voice. That sort of squeakiness that she has to her voice. And I'm there were just times when I would snap back to be it's Zellweger. So,
and see, for me, it was when she would purse her lips.
Yeah, and that too was my second one. I was that lip pursing thing I don't think is a Judy Garland thing.
She would purse her, and Judy did suck in her cheeks quite a bit, but she didn't purse her lips at the same time.
Yeah.
Judy would literally be giving you RFB. And Renee Zellweger would be more
RBF?
What did I say?
RFB.
Oh, yeah. RBF. And Judy Garland would be more sucking her cheeks in, whereas Renee Zellweger is pursing those lips out really far sometimes, almost to the point of I told you so.
Yeah, it was weird. And I was that's a weird tick, and I don't think it's a Judy Garland tick.
Yeah.
I noticed that as well. I do, but, so... Somebody on Twitter was 5 years from now, we're going to look back and be we really did Christian Bale a disservice for not giving him the Oscar for Vice. And I was thinking, we've had a lot of biopics in the past several years. And I would definitely say, Christian Bale nailed Dick Cheney for me. Just the way he did that breath movement. I was it was so much like being with Dick Cheney. It really captured him. I would say Judy Garland's performance was below that, but still above, and I can't believe he won the Oscar for it, Rami Malek as Freddie Mercury, who just didn't have any Freddie Mercury qualities to me whatsoever.
I think that Renee Zellweger gave a great part.
Yeah.
But it was a part.
Yeah.
I did not feel like I was seeing Judy.
Me neither. I felt like I was seeing someone doing their best to beat Judy.
Which I thought was like I said, for a comeback role, I can't remember the last thing she's been in that's been big, but she really, really nailed coming back.
I want to say Empire Records, but I'm just kidding.
But that's not what I took away from the film the most, and I like that.
Yeah,
I was more this is a real story of how she tried to be normal and how she tried to be human and how she didn't like show business and how she kind of hated all of it.
Right.
And we got to see that nittier grittier side, which I was going into it thinking it's going to be Judy Garland's the best. Let me sign the autographs. You're the wonderful. You're great, darling. And I'm I like that we didn't see that about her. For a biopic, I was more about she's a real human who had real feelings.
Yeah, I do agree. And I was interesting because I was talking to somebody about the movie today, and I thought, like, they sort of give you this line at the end of the movie that it's like she can't stay away from her audience. Like, being on stage and performing is like her true love. And, you know, they have this scene at the end where she's been fired because she's too unstable to go out on stage, and then she wants one last performance. And I was sort of like, again, I'm not an expert on Judy Garland. I've been doing a lot of research the past couple days, but I was like, that seems like a weird storyline to take for someone, A, who was mostly in film. She did start out on stage, but she switched to film, and being in film was not like having an audience, right? And 2, the only reason she started touring or singing live again was for the money. Oh. Like, and it certainly seemed like a job and not a love.
Right. And I think that's one thing that I know about Judy Garland and that I've been taught is that Judy Garland's love for the audience was that last scene. That she lived for those moments. Because, again, I think she was a bit of a diva.
Yeah.
And she needed those moments to feel validated.
Then they didn't, yeah, to your point, they just somehow didn't manage to convey that successfully in the movie.
I agree.
They just make her look like a strung out, you know, and the overwhelming, like, I'm just doing this for my children, got a little bit, like, tired to me. I was like, you don't have to keep hammering this point home. Like, it's kind of annoying. Like, I'm not here to judge her as a mother. She's an addict. She's probably not a very good one. Like, come on.
Well, and I mean, like, and we only talked really about 2 of her children. We briefly got to see Liza Minnelli. And, you know, Liza Minnelli also had problems with drugs.
Yep.
And so, but when your mother grows up taking drugs every 10 minutes and you grow up taking drugs every 10 minutes and it becomes a pattern. And I wanted to see a little more of the tension that Liza Minnelli used to have with Judy Garland. You know? And you saw just like a brief 10 seconds of like, oh, are you ready for the party? Are you sure you're ready? Like, they were both jealous of each other. They both multiple times had said that they were jealous of each other's
right.
fame, and that they both kind of wanted the other one to be happy but not succeed.
Right.
Because, and you know, Judy Garland comes into a unique perspective because she's given birth to this talent.
Right.
And Liza Minnelli is like, well, now I'm competing with my mother, who is this talent. So I missed that. I thought that would have been a great kind of like really nice entry into the movie. And like we literally get maybe 10 seconds of Liza Minnelli.
Right. And like way too much of the kids. And it definitely dragged. Like I started to be like, I'm getting bored. So for me, I think the big problem I would say that I had with the movie after we talked about Renee Zellweger, like, I believe her name is Darcy Shaw, who played the young Judy Garland. Absolutely nothing acting. Like, and also was like really tiny and skinny. And I kept thinking like, I'm not convinced that this girl has a weight problem. Like, she did look like she'd never had a weight problem in her life. And like,
and Judy did. I mean,
yeah,
Judy, let me rephrase.
Yeah.
Judy was not ever big. Judy Garland did not have a weight problem probably as a teenager, but she was a bigger girl.
She was curvaceous.
Yeah,
and
how do you say this? With you can't see us both describing her right now. Like,
first of all, we'll just say it. She had boobs. Like, if you've seen Wizard of Oz, like one of the issues of trying to make her look like a little girl, and one of the reasons I think they were trying to starve her to death was because she was pretty fully developed by 16. Like, she was pretty curvaceous already, and that wasn't the look they were going for because Dorothy's actually supposed to be much younger than 16.
Right.
And so it's like, but the girl they picked to play her was like, you know, you could have put her hair back and a pinafore on her, and she'd have looked 12. Like, I was like, but this was an odd, and she.
But she gave me no depth.
No, none.
And I didn't feel like the girl could act very well. I felt like she was reading lines for a script. And
I also just felt like beyond just that part had no purpose.
I could have done without all the flashbacks. I honestly could have done without all the flashbacks.
I was talking to somebody who's like younger than me and maybe not as steeped in Judy Garland, I don't know. But I mean, like, my mom gave me Valley of the Dolls to read when I was like 15 or something. Like, but I was like, I mean, everybody knows. Doesn't everybody already know this about Judy Garland? I'm like, okay, I guess people didn't know. But, you know, she talked about it. She gave interviews. Like, I was like, this is like
she was very open about like the fact that the profession, the business, the whatever you want to call it, the industry, had taken from her. had used her, had forced her to do drugs, had forced her on diets, had forced her to do sexual encounters and put her in odd situations. Like, there was no secrets with Judy. Judy laid it all out.
Right. And so I was just like, did we need this flashback? Like, who doesn't know this about Judy? I mean, probably we did, but it was not artfully done. And the movie would have been shorter and much better and tighter if they had just eliminated
if you didn't know
those flashbacks.
But that's just like the instance with Liza Minnelli. If you had never known that Liza Minnelli was Judy's daughter, you would have no idea that was Liza Minnelli in that scene.
Right.
You would just thought it was another Hollywood actress, like, doing whatever. Because, you know, they never call her Liza. They never... If you... Like, that's what I say. There was no explanation to a lot of the scenes. It was just kind of like... They weren't even flashbacks. Yeah. They were cut scenes to, like, fill time in the movie. And I was like, you could have cut 30 minutes out of the movie and cut all the flashbacks.
Yeah, absolutely. So... I just sort of, I felt like overall the movie was really uneven. So this, you know, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I felt like there were a lot of really extreme close-ups in this movie, like just so tight on her face all the time.
That's when I noticed most of the lip pursing.
Me too, but also I got stuck in like the second row of the theater, so like I was like, am I biased just because I was too close to the screen? Regardless,
I was in the very back. Okay, it's fine.
Good. So yeah, so I just not surprisingly, the part of the movie that I liked the best and I thought worked well, which was the most tacked on, didn't belong there remotely at all, was, you know, her two gay fans. And those guys were great. They were just great. They nailed their performances. They were so endearing. I loved them to death. I loved them having tea in his apartment. Like,
but they're not real.
No, I was like, this doesn't even belong in this movie, and yet it's the only part. Like that part, I thoroughly enjoyed.
And I think the idea was to give a nod to Judy as a gay icon.
Absolutely.
And I know if you're listening to this, you're like, everybody, you know, like makes fun, like, oh, Judy is a gay icon and whatnot. But I think the reason that we needed those characters is for the same reason Judy is a gay icon. Judy was different than everybody else in her field at the time.
Yeah.
Judy came from, her father was a known homosexual.
Right. She married two of them.
Right, like, it is...
I think Liza Minnelli did as well, didn't she?
Yeah, I think Liza probably did for different reasons, but she really revolutionized the way gay individuals were perceived by a celebrity during that time.
Really?
She didn't shy away from acknowledging them. You know, one of the things I think we missed about Judy's live performance is she would go into the audience. We got just a tiny bit of that when she walked onto the table. She would go into the audience.
Okay.
And yes, she was sloshed and drugged out in a lot of these shows. But she would go into the audience and talk to them and sing to them and, like, do all these, like, funny little, like, not gimmicks, but, like, miniature skits with the audience members who were not unbeknownst to them. And several times she would, like, be supportive of, you know, same-sex couples there. Yeah. And especially in London. What they don't tell you is, like, during most of her shows... The back row seats were completely usually sold out by only all men. Never published that they were homosexual.
Right.
But alone, all men in the back rows. Because she did have a way of, like, speaking her mind. She was not shy about telling people her dad was a homosexual.
Right.
She was not shy about saying that her mother abused her. She was not shy about all these things that men had always wanted from her. And that I think that's why she attached to homosexual men more, is because they didn't want anything from her. They wanted to love her.
Right.
And it fulfilled some need of Judy never feeling loved before. And she also, you know, Somewhere Over the Rainbow is a gay anthem because when it was written, there were several nods in that song to feeling alone, feeling different, feeling quite unique. And then The Wizard of Oz in itself, there's a whole subset theory that The Wizard of Oz is actually just a homoerotic montage of, you know, queer individuals who are all different. A man without a heart, a man without a brain, and a cowardly lion. But also the revolutionized the way camp really has been sought out. And so gay men fell into love with Judy and then fell in love with The Wizard of Oz, but like followed Judy more because Judy was willing to talk to them. But also was not shy about, like, I've not had a normal life.
Right.
I'm
Right.
still here fighting every day of my life. And I think that end scene, where even though these are fictional characters, there's this Judy is like having a breakdown singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and she can't quite finish the song. And so the audience starts to take over, but it's the catalyst of these gay men, the only two people she's had a real connection with in this movie, start to support her and show up. And I think was a great ironic parallel for what Judy did for the gay men. She was a catalyst to show them inspiration. I'm here to support you when no one else can. And I thought that was a great moment to share of like parallel intersection where Judy was dependent on the gays as much as the gays were dependent on Judy to revolutionize the way that she could be loved and the way that she could be accepted, but also the way that they could be accepted.
Yeah, and I think that there's something to be said for the fact that, like, you can be very successful just being a gay icon. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, like, that, you know, whatever community or culture you're a part of, you know, that there are whole other communities and cultures who have their own icons that can be enormously successful that you may sort of know about on the periphery or never really heard or think about, but it's like their fans are enough to, like, make them successful. And you just are like, oh, who is this person who's a huge Bollywood star that I've never heard of? You know, like whatever the community is like, and owing, and so much of owing her success to that. I think, again, did it belong in this movie? I don't know. I'm super glad it was there just because the two, I think the two male actors.
That scene I think was one of the best scenes.
Yeah. But like moving into that, so I've done like a fair amount of research on my own. I had always known the sort of friend of Dorothy thing, but it turns out, which was a way of checking to see if somebody else was gay in predominantly like the 40s and through World War II. For those of you who don't know, people would sort of casually say like, oh, are you a friend of Dorothy? Or like, oh, I'm a friend of Dorothy. And then you would know.
And if you weren't gay, you did not know.
No, yeah.
I mean, it's very colloquial today we say it, but like,
is it? I feel like it's pretty fallen out of favor, but I'm not in the gay community, so I don't want to. I shouldn't speak for other people.
I mean, I literally JR's bar down the street has a picture of Judy Garland as Dorothy, so it's like you know, but back then it was very secretive. Right. So this, I guess, part of it is like there's not as you can say it sort of jokingly, but you don't need to say it. Like you can just say, "Are you gay?" And that's okay. Like no one's going to jail here in this country anyway. So, interestingly, though, it's not 100% sure that is actually related to The Wizard of Oz. Oh, I would argue it's not. It actually comes from Dorothy Byrne.
Dorothy Parker.
Excuse me. Dorothy Parker.
So, I was like, oh, cool. It soon became attached to that because of Judy Garland's role and the Wizard of Oz's role in the gay community, but like, I was like, see, Dorothy Parker makes way more sense to me.
You know, if you believe conspiracy and everything like that, Dorothy is wonderful poetry, famously
biting wit.
It's one of my recommendations. I'll get to it.
Oh, cool! Yay!
But Dorothy Parker published amazing poetry and was very open about like homoerotic love and like all kinds of like queer identity stuff.
Yeah, if you don't know who Dorothy Parker is, get on that.
Yeah, I've heard some of her great poetry. I'm going to recommend at the end.
Cool.
But the writers, knowing that there's this conspiracy that the writers wrote Dorothy for this movie for Judy Garland to play, knowing her name would be Dorothy, and then threw in several. The Cowardly Lion is known as one of the biggest camp gay icons there is, because he is supposed to be what queer identity represented at that time: shameful, afraid, but like this very
unmanly,
frilly,
like,
feminine, you know, and even below women, because if you follow the Wizard of Oz, he's below Dorothy. Dorothy is the one who kind of dominates him and takes charge, and so writing that character and writing like the Field of Poppies. The poppies, an unofficial flower of the gay revolution, and it just goes on and on and on because the weekend, of Judy Garland's death.
Yes, that was
the same as the Stonewall riots. And you hear testimonials with people who will say, I can't say Judy was the reason.
Right.
But it felt, there's been several interviews with people who have been at Stonewall who said, tonight felt like the night while we were paying respects to Judy.
Right. And it was in a reason that maybe a lot of people were out that night was because it was her funeral had been in the morning. And so, yeah, I mean, she has sort of outsized status. And I was, like I said, I was doing my research and I was looking and I was like, was she like the first gay icon? Like, okay, probably no. Like, who? As long as there have been people, there have been gay people, so presumably there have been gay icons, right?
But somebody was the first historical gay icon, I think.
But I was just sort of doing some interesting research into like what makes a gay icon. Like, how do you become a gay icon? And I feel like the one thing that I really just want to put down on the record here that is somehow, I feel it can be sort of overlooked in this discussion when you talk about gay icons, is that Judy Garland, Barbra Streisand, Bette Midler, like pretty much everybody but maybe Cher and Madonna, like they were really, really talented. They were once in a lifetime talents, particularly Judy Garland. I mean, her, like, Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, like, I mean, I defy you to stay dry-eyed, and, I don't even celebrate Christmas. And I feel like everybody sort of plays up the camp aspect of it, which is part of it. But, like, can we all just take a step back and give the gay community credit for, like, responding to somebody who's just really talented and, like, admiring talent when they see it,
And I think that's one of I will speak for mostly gay men because I think lesbians have their own
They do,
icons.
and I have a good article that I can pass on to people.
Also known as dicons a lot of times.
Oh, I know. New terminology for me.
James Dean being the number one lesbian icon. But I think that there's something to be said about the way she was so open. And I think people attached to that and wanted to idolize somebody who was that open and that free to live their life and still was famous for having struggles and having a gay father and for being a part of something that was different than everybody else. So I think gay men wanted to empathize and sympathize with her, knowing that they had suffered several issues of the same caliber. But I think one thing that allows people to recognize talent is when you're not trying to compete and you're not trying to sleep with something, you can really step back and be like, holy crap, this is amazing. And a lot of men, Judy Garland was very sexualized in her day, and a lot of men wanted to be sexual with Judy Garland. But then a lot of women were competing with her because her voice was so different than anybody else's. I mean, London begged her to come for years to do stuff. And so I think it was a unique perspective of they didn't want anything from her other than to sympathize with her.
And enjoy her talent.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I really like the way you put that. So another article I was reading was like, look, lesbian icons are totally different. We're not getting into that. And I was like, funny sidebar. Really appreciated it. And so again, the like couple articles I read kind of talked about the two big things being three big. One, the talent. Two, the sort of outsider status. Like like gay icons have had to have gone through their own struggle. They're outsiders. They're different looking or come from different backgrounds. Like, so that's something that, gay people can identify with, or gay men. And then three, like the sort of like camp aspect, which I thought it was funny because the article I read like tried to define camp, and I'm like,
you can't define it. You know it when you see it.
Yeah, it's the pornography definition. It was like, you know it when you see it. And I couldn't find a lot of good information on camp, but there was an article by Bryan Lowder, sort of like the gay columnist for Slate. I don't know if he still writes for them.
I don't know.
I don't think so. Where he was like, look, I like being gay. I like gay culture and I like campy stuff. And I'm totally not into your like mainstreaming gay culture and making it more like straight culture. Like, I want to be flaming. Like, I enjoy it. I love that about gay culture, and you guys are trying to destroy it. Which I was like, yeah, man, flyer, freak fly high. Like, but I was thinking, like, that article came out several years ago, and now we have the reboot of Queer Eye. We have Pose.
An upsurgence of people watching RuPaul's Drag Race who are non-LGBT.
RuPaul has taken off. He's having his second act, which couldn't happen to a better person, right? Like, how can you not
I would say he's having his second and third. I mean,
like, how can you not love RuPaul?
Different countries, now has a talk show. Like, has really... But, like...
He's just... I mean, he's just one of those people that, like... He's just so magnetic. I love RuPaul.
Yeah, I agree.
And so I was like, do you think, like, is camp coming back?
I don't think camp ever left.
Good. Okay.
But I don't think camp has ever been as prominent. I think we lost a lot when we lost the club kids. And I think we lost a lot of camp. But I also think camp became associated with drug use. Because these club kids were going out and, like, doing all these extravagant camp looks, but also tripping. Okay,
so interesting.
So I think it became so closely associated with drugs.
Interesting.
That people were like, okay, we're not going to call it camp anymore.
Okay.
We're going to distance ourselves a little bit to separate from this club kid community.
Okay.
But I think it's always been there. And then you take some looks at, like, outfits over the years, over the years, I think we've, like, seen, like, people who have pushed the boundaries or people who have really gone above and beyond. When we didn't call it camp, we were just like, oh, that's interesting.
So I sort of wonder if, like, which would be the best possible world, which is the reverse is true? That, like, camp has gone mainstream? Like, and I was thinking of, like, okay.
Camp, by definition, can't be mainstream.
Can't it?
No, because then it's no longer camp. Camp is so outside of the box it pushes boundaries. Once camp becomes mainstream, somebody has to do something new and different above that.
Okay. That's fair. I guess I was thinking of, like, all of the things that I love that are camp because I'm a straight woman and I get to love camp too. Like, I was thinking, so I was like, I was thinking through my recommendations, John Waters and Divine, like, so much good stuff there. And you're the one who told me that Ursula the Sea Witch from The Little Mermaid was based on Divine, which, like, blew my mind. That's the best thing I've ever heard. And I was thinking of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, but I'm pretty sure I've recommended that before. And then I was thinking, like, the more modern stuff. And I was thinking of, like, the one movie I know that, like, a whole bunch of, like, people who would never connect to this love is, like, Moulin Rouge. Like, a whole lot of, like, I think people who have no idea who Baz Luhrmann is, like, love Moulin Rouge, which I'm like, it was sort of on the edge of camp.
Yeah.
But I do think it's, like, having a little bit of a resurgence in terms of people feeling.
And a lot of that you can thank to drag queens.
Yeah, and drag queens have had a resurgence. And I didn't go into the history of why. Do you have any theories?
I think finally so once something is taboo, we like it. Then when something is no longer taboo, we lose interest in it. So for the resurgence to happen, it has to galvanize, revolutionize itself in some way. And I really think the reason that drag is become back into the front line is because it is the American competition now. Now that, you can do drag, that's okay. But, like, if you're in a competition now, that's a different story because now you're competing for something. Now that I can relate to that, you're not just doing performance anymore. But I think some of the campiest performances in drag are not the ones that come from mainstream Drag Race or at your local Drag Race affiliates.
Yeah.
And I think those are, like, the camp I live for, you know. I just think those are the kind of experiences that camp really draws from. And people create unique experiences and performances. And then it builds and galvanizes off of that. And then it makes it into acceptable to be digestible for the mainstream. Okay.
Yeah, and I remember one of the beauty podcasts I listened to, and I was like, I never thought of this, and I thought when someone said it, it made so much sense, and I was like, oh my God, that is weird. So they had a makeup artist on, and he was sort of complaining about, you know, the like contouring and the like very heavily made up look. And he was like, all of that stuff came out of the drag community to try to make men look like women. It's weird that women are using it. And I was like, I didn't know that. Like, I didn't know that's where that came from. It makes total sense. And he's completely right. It is kind of weird that women are using it, but like, maybe it's okay. Like, you know what I mean? Like, again, like, so it's come out of that community. Like, and so somebody else thinks it's cool. Like,
just had a conversation today that most beauty icons right now are men. You know, Jeffree Star, James Charles, they are the leading beauty world consultants right now. And they're men. And women, queer individuals are willing to listen to them and willing to do. And heteronormative men are not willing to fight them on it because they can't dabble in makeup. Otherwise, that makes them feminine queer too.
Right.
So they're like, fine, whatever. Get your success for makeup. We don't care. But then if you try to throw like a gay man into like Olympic sports or regular sports or something like simple that, you know, like power, the same way you could do with women, then heteronormative men have problems with it because it's challenging something that they can be a part of and their status quo. And so
I think that's changing though.
I mean, think it's changing.
I was at a party, a summer party like a couple weeks ago, a friend of mine, and there was, a dad there with, blue painted toenails or fingernails, I think. And he was like, I don't know, like my daughter was like, I'm going to paint my nails. Like, you want to paint your nails too, daddy? And it was like, he was like, okay, and I was sitting there like looking at his nails at this very sort of like preppy white dude with kids, thinking he might have gone to work like, with these nails and just been like, whatever, my daughter wanted to paint my nails. Like, I'm like, what a different world we live in versus like even 10 years ago. And so I guess to try to distill this down to a point, if I have one, is that maybe it's not that camp is going mainstream. It's just that camp is awesome so that more people now feel comfortable liking it.
Fair.
So it doesn't have to be mainstream as much as it's like, it's got a bigger audience because it's great. Like, and more people can be like, it's great. I totally want it on this scene.
I agree.
Yeah. So wrapping it all up in terms of a social impact score from 1 to 10, what would you give Judy?
3.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
It doesn't do much for it, everybody, but like, 3. I don't know what to say. It's just, there it is.
Yes. And can I just say, in a small moment of frustration, in preparing for this podcast, I tried to watch the Judy Garland Star is Born, which I've never actually seen, even though it has been heavily recommended to me. 1, 3, and 4 are all available on Amazon. I'm like, I don't want to watch the Frederick March one. How is the Judy? And I'm like, I definitely don't want to watch the Barbra Streisand one. Like, how is the Judy Garland one the only one I can't get? So that's kind of a bummer. So if it maybe puts that out on streaming, it's had some positive impact. Recommendations for the week?
Sure. I have a few. You know me, I like recommendations, everybody. I want you to read Culture Clash, The Making of Gay Sensibility by Michael Bronski, which is describes gay icons and talks about how gays become icons and stuff like that. I want to recommend the poetry of Dorothy Parker, everybody, especially Indrope, which is, I think, one of her best. It's her first original collection.
Okay.
No, it's not Indrope. Enough Rope, excuse me. By Dorothy Parker, and it has a collection of wonderful poetry to get in, so I think you should read that for sure. I think if you want to like actually learn about celebrities and addiction, to read The Harder They Fall by Gary Stormberg and Jane Merrill. It's from 2005, so it's a little bit older, but I think it encapsulates a lot of like addictions and celebrity. And it's called The Harder They Fall, Celebrities and Their Real Life Stories of Addiction and Recovery. So I think that you would get more out of that if you actually want to read about celebrities and addiction that are not just like strung out stories, that are actually like real-time stories about like death and suicide and like what's going on in their head and the pressure. And the last thing I want to recommend is you go online and you watch a Judy Garland old performance from the 50s. And then you go and watch Liza Minnelli's performance from like when she was at the same age. So compare them, like if you're watching the 50s, you're going to watch the, 60s, 70s of Liza Minnelli. And I want you to watch their hand movements, their head shakes, and their tics, because you cannot miss that they are related. And I think they have just such great performances. And really, I think there's something to be said about talent through generations and hereditary. Those are my recommendations. How about you?
So I want to recommend what I had no idea was a gay icon. Small I icon, not big I icon. The first time I finally saw a show with this artist, I loved her, and I had wished that I'd seen her earlier, and I didn't. And I got there, and I looked around at this big DC venue, and I was like, there are a lot of gay men here. Like, I had no idea she had a huge gay following, which was Liz Phair.
Oh, yeah.
And she did Exile and Guyville, which is the album I'm recommending if you need an intro to Liz Phair. It is amazing. It is one of the best albums ever. Like, somehow the younger generations have not figured out that, like, Liz Phair is the best. So I want to recommend that. And I just because I had that personal moment of thinking, she writes songs. Like, for her time, she wrote songs no other woman wrote. Like, real songs about what it's like to, like, deal with men. And I, looking around the room, I was like, oh, yeah, no, totally makes sense. I see why she has this huge gay following, but it was a complete surprise to me. I was like, I had no idea. How cool is that? Like, so throwing that out there. And I believe that wraps up our show. So if you want to reach out to us, we have a Facebook page, we have a website, moviesthatmatterpodcast.com. We're at Twitter at moviesmatterpod. I am going to be going to Egypt, so you are going to get a rerun and a discussion of really awesome horror movies in honor of October for our next episode. Something for you to revisit. And we hope you enjoyed this episode. And remember, movies matter.
And so do you.
We'll see you next time.